Let me tell you something that'll stick with you long after you hear it. Because sometimes a single afternoon tells you everything about who we are, what we fight for, and how easy it is for someone with power to forget what it means to really serve. So, picture this. Downtown, that branch with marble floors so shiny you can see your own doubts reflected, mahogany counters, glass everywhere, air cold enough to make even the most confident person pull their jacket tighter, and me, Vanessa Johnson. Walking in on a day, I decided to be nobody special. No power suit, no executive assistant, just a mom running an errand, the kind any person could have, unless the world decides you're not just any person. That day, I took a number and stood in line, nothing flashy, just a business casual outfit, holding a check, $50,000. Payment for running a financial literacy program in neighborhoods where most banks would rather close early than invest real money or attention. The irony? The check came from the very bank I stood in, Heartland Financial, with their big community billboards and all the slogans about everyone belongs. But I noticed, like I always do, who gets called up first, who waits, who gets the polite smiles, who gets the tight-lipped, please hold. It was right there in the way the white clients sailed through while folks who looked like me kept standing and standing and standing. After 20 minutes, when it was finally my turn, Richard Clean, branch supervisor, mid-30s, face carved into a kind of permanent smirk, decided he'd handle my transaction himself. He took the check like it was dirty laundry, holding it between two fingers, peering at it under the light, making a whole show of it for everyone in the lobby. "This is quite a large sum for a personal check," he said, as if I didn't belong there, as if my name itself was some kind of warning. I explained, calmly, professionally. It was a business payment for consulting, sliding over my ID and credentials, but Richard barely glanced at them, already convinced he knew my story better than I did. What he didn't notice, what nobody did at first, was outside, across the street. A giant billboard being unveiled, Anthony Johnson, NBA star, my son, standing tall next to the Heartland Financial logo. The words, "Where everyone belongs," stretched bold across his shoulders. Inside, Richard's eyes kept darting from the check to my outfit, making calculations, whispering to the young teller, Jennifer, who looked at me with something between apology and fear. He claimed strict protocols, but just then, at the next window, a white businessman deposited a check for almost the same amount. No questions, just a smile and a chat about golf. When I pointed this out, his posture stiffened. "Every situation is different," he muttered. And then, with everyone watching, he started tapping my account on the terminal, making a big show of how unusual this deposit was for me. His voice rang out so loud, it was a violation in itself, broadcasting my business for everyone to hear. And then, right there, he picked up the check, tore it in half, then again, until the pieces sat scattered on the counter like he was shredding some criminal evidence, not a hard-earned payment for community work. He slid the pieces back to me with one finger, as if afraid he'd get some of me on him. "I cannot accept this. It appears fraudulent," he declared. All the heads turned. Some people whispered, "Can he do that?" But nobody spoke up. Not for me. I gathered the pieces, hands steady, and asked for his refusal documentation and the specific reason he'd destroyed a financial instrument without proper verification. That threw him off for a second. "We don't provide documentation for fraudulent items," he lied, cornered by his own arrogance that I stepped aside, letting him stew, and looked out the glass to see my son's face smiling down on the street, the bitterest kind of irony. That bank was paying him to sell inclusion while treating me, his mother, like an intruder. So I texted my executive assistant, just a quick note. "Documentation needed, discrimination incident, Supervisor Richard Clean." The man who thought I was a nobody didn't realize who he'd just tried to humiliate. While he played hero, I got to work, called for a full branch review, then sat calmly in the waiting area, making notes, documenting, not for me, but for the system. When Richard tried to get me to leave, sending a nervous young employee to brush me out, I asked for the branch's CRA compliance documents, something only industry insiders ever request. That rattled him. He fumbled, lied about protocols, tried to bluff his way out. but I quoted the federal regulations back at him, showed him the rules on my tablet, watched the power in the room shift as the customers started to see who really understood how the bank was supposed to work. Right then, an urgent executive envelope landed on Richard's desk, corporate headquarters demanding verification of all denied transactions, with demographic data attached. The panic in his face was almost comic. He tried to coax me into his office for a private resolution. I declined, said, "My humiliation was public, so the solution will be too." Minutes later, regional headquarters called. Then a stream of corporate cars pulled up, executives in suits filing in, some recognizing me instantly, their warmth in stark contrast to the cold treatment I'd just received. The drama reached its peak when Diane Phillips, the regional director, entered with the chief diversity officer and HR director at her side. She went straight to Richard. "Your presence is required in the conference room immediately." For the first time, he seemed to realize the scale of his mistake. I stood, introduced myself properly, executive vice president, national board member, and, oh yes, mother of the man on their billboard. The silence that followed was deafening, but it wasn't about revenge, not for me. I laid out what happened, not just as an isolated humiliation, but as a pattern. Data showing that customers of color waited longer, were questioned more, denied more often, all under the cover of protocol. The evidence was too strong to ignore. Richard was just a symptom of a system designed to exclude while pretending to include. The aftermath changed everything. The branch, the bank, even the industry, forced into transparency, compelled to create real systems for accountability, mandatory bias training, data tracking, whistleblower protections. I led the reforms, working nights, facing down corporate resistance with facts about the true cost of discrimination, lost customers, fines, lawsuits, shattered trust. The only way forward was real inclusion, and now the other banks wanted to know how we did it. How to keep from being next on the news.as for Richard. He didn't lose his job outright. I insisted he face the consequences in a new way, sharing his journey from ignorance to awareness as part of the very training he'd once ignored. He became a living case study, a warning and a lesson. I told him, "This was never about you and me. It's about building a system that works for everyone." He finally saw it. Maybe for the first time. 6 months later, the changes were everywhere. Metrics equalized, service improved, the barriers falling, not with a crash, but with the quiet steadiness of justice done right. 1 year after, I walked back into that same branch. The staff looked different, more diverse, the mood lighter. Richard greeted me respectfully, a different man. My son, Anthony, now studying economic equity, dropped by and told him, "Your case studies required reading in my program." Richard nodded, humbled. The most valuable education of my life was learning to see what was right in front of me all along. And that, I guess, is the point. The true victory isn't in the confrontation or the public reckoning, but in the everyday, the quiet, consistent fairness that means nobody else stands at a counter waiting to be believed. The win is when the extraordinary becomes so normal, it's barely worth mentioning. That's the world I fight for. And if this story moved you, you know why it matters. Because sometimes justice gets the last word.